I hope you've been enjoying the free day in the Candidates tournament, but I wanted to keep you topped up with some chess. So I've been looking at the game between Wang Hao and Ian Nepomniachtchi, played in round 12. There's been some discussion about the end of this game, so I'm going to go through the whole game, but I'm going to lay particular emphasis on the final position. So don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon, links down there. So here we go, Wang Hao with the white pieces, and very interesting opening choice from Nepo. He plays the Petrov, so we know that he can play some very sharp systems. He's a great exponent of the Najdorf, for example, but in this game he uses the Petrov, which is a great favourite of Wang Hao himself. So really interesting psychology here. So how would Wang Hao play? Well, he plays a line that Grishuk played against him in the first half of the tournament. A rather quiet system. We basically transpose to a French exchange variation, symmetrical. And here, Queen E2 check. So here is where, so this is the game Grishuk against Wang Hao from, as I said, the first half of the tournament. And Wang Hao in this position played Bishop E6. And, well, I think Grishuk got a little advantage here. But Nepo played, well, let's say the more traditional move, Queen E7. And here they reached an endgame. And I mean, this position has been reached before. I mean, obviously it's a little bit more comfortable for white because the king has castled and white is ready to attack in the center. And in fact, there was a blitz game between Carlsen and Akobian played a few years ago, where Carlsen very quickly built up a good position. That game went like this: Rook E8, it's tempting to bring that rook from the corner into play, but now Carlsen brought out his pieces very, very quickly, landed the knight on the outpost, and quickly built a very impressive position on the king's side, and Carlsen won that game. I mean, you can see optically it does look very, very nice for white already. But it's interesting, Nepo was ready for this position. He has come to the game very well prepared. And he quickly played knight c6. And this is a computer-approved move. But it's very logical. It's a very understandable move. Basically, black buys time for development. Knight b4 is kind of a threat. Well, I mean, this position is definitely a threat. So white plays c3 to prevent that. And that means, it simply means that because this is a pawn move, then black has gained time to bring his pieces into the game. What's interesting is that Wang Hao thought for 10 minutes over this move. So, he seems somewhat surprised by this. That tells me he hasn't come into this game very well prepared. And, it says something about his pre-tournament preparation, actually. Anyway, h6. Yeah, I mean, in fact, all the way through this game, it feels as though, there's one player here who's very motivated, Nepomniachtchi, of course, and Wang Hao, well, feels like his tournament, it doesn't matter anymore. But anyway, let's see. So h6, covering the g5 square, that if check, then simply bishop e6, and, well, black is developing very quickly. Knight h4 played. So Wang Hao wants to get something tangible, basically. He wants to grab the two bishops. And yeah, g6 in that case looks risky because white will be able to take here, for example. So rook e8. So this is what I mean about getting something tangible. He manages to claim the 2 bishops. But the thing is, black is so solid in this position and has decent development that actually he's able to set up very well. So I'm going to zip through these next moves fairly quickly, but just I think we should note this maneuver of the knight from Nepo. So these are good moves. H5, claiming a little bit of space on the king side. That's good. And yeah, so F5 square can't be used. So nice pawn chain. And this knight maneuvers to a better square. So basically after knight b6, white really has to make this move pawn to b3. And that creates a little weakness. Well, weakness is here. And Nepo manages to seize on that. Of course, the position should be equal. It's well, there's one open file, but it's interesting that, you know, white simply can't use the 2 bishops in this kind of position. And now the knight heads, having done its job on the queen side, heads for this excellent square e6, driving away the bishop. Bishop comes back, and now rook c8. Start of a good plan. c5. An excellent move. You know, normally if your opponent has the 2 bishops, you're advised don't break open the position. But here these bishops are really not very good. And the point is that black wants to get through to these slight pawn weaknesses on c3 and b3. And there's another reason for breaking the position open as well, that actually white's king is a little insecure. And this is the basic theme for the rest of the game. White has played the pawn move f3, and notice this diagonal is open. But also, if black ever breaks through, then the second rank is open. Whereas black's king is completely secure behind these pawns. So bear that in mind. But here is where really I think it would have been advisable for Wang to just think, okay, I've lost the initiative here. I need to steer this game towards a draw, which white can do. So he took on c5. But I think knight e3 is a far more solid move. So first of all, this pawn isn't on prise because of this pin. And if, say, rook c7, just getting out of this pin, then takes and knight c2, and that's super solid. The knight can always recapture on d4 if necessary, and there are going to be exchanges on the e-file, so that's level. And if pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, so I repeat, knight takes not possible because of the rook, and now that's a threat. And this position, well, there's not a lot going on there basically. That's absolutely fine for white. Well, fine for both colours. It's even. But pawn takes pawn just gives black a little bit of incentive to carry on. You can see, yeah, that these pawns just a little bit tender. Rook c6 steps out of this pin. You never know when that knight might be able to hop in. There's also the possibility perhaps to break with d4 again, bringing that knight or black's pieces into the game. So watch out for that second rank. So Wang decides to open up the queen side to exchange pieces. So rook's exchanged, and now this knight, this is the hardest working piece in this game. Performs wonders in this game. We've seen it's hopped all over the place, and now it is going to hop out into d6 and does absolutely brilliantly. Rook c6. So we've had an exchange of pieces. I mean, normally, of course, exchange of pieces and pawns would bring one side, the defending side, closer to a draw. But now that things have opened up, that king could be in trouble. This is where you would desperately like that pawn to be back on f2. So this is White's problem. And even when these pawns are exchanged, White still has difficulties. Now, I mean, there are various ways that White could have improved over the next few moves, but it is tricky. It's impossible to say here is a definite drawing continuation, and that is White's problem here. Very hard to defend in that sense. So let's see. So I'm going to zip forward fairly quickly now towards the end of the game, but basically it just slips away. And well, Wang said afterwards that yeah, he was basically disgusted with his play when he talked about the game off in the press conference, and yeah, it does go downhill from here, but very, very difficult. So advance of the h-pawn, classic strategy, of course, and Nepo embeds that on h3. Wonderful. Pawn means that h2 is always a target, but also it sets up a mating net as well very often. Now this pawn, okay, got to keep the rook behind it, but no problem, as long as we don't allow a check, then that's fine. So king e7, very secure, that's good. Knight d2 might be a better move, but anyway, listen, I don't want to spend too long over this. One could go crazy analysing this. Black is better, and it is really hard to defend. Wang manages to get that d pawn off the board, but now we're going to see, yeah, the problem with that second rank, and this is so unpleasant to defend. So there are going to be a combination of mating threats with that knight, but of course f3 is the target in this position. It is really unpleasant. The king just finds a bit of security, and now Black's pieces start to fly into the position. Black's knight is on its way. Well, you can just imagine, you know, that knight is not far off coming to f2 via one of these squares, so that it's not just the f3 pawn that's vulnerable, but that square as well. So that's why rook d8 was played. You can see covering those two squares. But now this pawn is targeted and drops. And here, well, it's close to lost. I mean, the computers, as I said, can point out various moments. Like here, computer thinks knight d6 is a good move, but it's a very strange move, I have to say, putting the knight right the way up the other side of the board. I think it's a desperate situation now. And in this position, Wang Hao resigned, much to everyone's surprise. But actually, there is no doubt that this is lost. I mean, I thought the press conference afterwards, you can find that online, by the way, if you Google it, was quite telling, because Wang Hao just looked crushed. Well, you know, he looked like a man who'd spent a few hours at the board, you know, 5 hours or so at the board, and had been just thoroughly outplayed, which he has been in this game. I thought, you know, Nepo played a beautiful game here, taking his chances, just, you know, not going crazy, just holding his nerve. And I think this is impressive. We've seen brilliance from Nepomniachtchi in the past, but his play is sometimes erratic, but here he was absolutely steady. Okay, let's find out, you know, why did Wang Hao give up? I mean, he just said, I didn't want to continue this position, and it's very understandable. Let's look at some moves. Basically, the king is a target. This pawn is a target. Obviously, if a second pawn drops, that is game over. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, random move. Rook d7. Keeping tabs on this one. Now the knight comes in. Actually, rook d7. It's a very unfortunate square for the rook. That knight is coming into e5. Hits the rook. Threatens the pawn, but also threatens a devastating check on f3 as well. That's a disaster. Okay, that's not good. So you can see how tricky it is with that knight. Okay, what about bringing the king out? Okay, let's give a check. And knight comes to f4 and e6. So that's a super solid square. And having got the knight to this beautiful square, that means that pawn can't advance. Let's attack that g-pawn. And there is no defense here. Yeah, king steps away and rook takes pawn. Okay, so king f2, no good. Right, let's try g5. Perhaps advancing helps. Not really. Okay, the knight now covers f2. We want to play rook a1. Now knight here. Now we can target that pawn. The knight defends at the moment, but no problem. We'll move the knight in. So remember, if that drops, that is the end. Rook here, okay, careful. That is a threat. But here, that's a really nasty check. The king really doesn't have a good square to go to. And that pawn drops. I mean, you know, there are various other defenses. Obviously, if king takes, then knight f4 is, yeah, fatal. Wins the rook. Okay, let's go back here. Rook e8. Let's try this. Knight here. Okay, rook e4 defends the pawn. Check. And now we simply bring the king in. Now you can see the white is totally tied down, so the king is going to come in here. And now, there we go. The king crawls in. And here's a lovely move. King h4 covers the g3 square, so that now black is ready to check on a2, and the king won't be able to advance. Knight here, well, game over. That one's going to drop. And finally, let's just look at another one of these again here. We'll try rook e3 this time. Well, again, a check. And let's anchor that knight on f4. Rook comes to the second rank. And rook g2. And that one's going to drop, or, well, if that's defended, then h2 is going to drop. So, was it premature? Was Wang Hao's resignation premature in this position? A little bit. You know, normally one would want to, you know, you try everything, you know, but is it lost? Absolutely, this position is lost. Is it easy for black to play? Yes, it is pretty easy for black to play. You know, the targets are there, g4, h2, and the king as well. It is utterly lost, basically. So, great game by Nepo. And with 2 games to go, he is still a half a point clear. But anything could happen in these last 2 games. So I'm really looking forward to it. The Candidates is my favourite tournament in the whole of the chess calendar by an absolute mile. It's great stuff. Thanks for watching.